In a world where kindness is often overlooked, Leo, a man who once felt invisible, shows us the transformative power of a simple act. When he offers his only jacket to a stranger, it sets off a chain of events that will change his life, and an entire company, forever. From homelessness to leadership, Leo's story is one of resilience, hope, and the profound impact of human connection. Want to know how one small gesture can turn everything around? Stick with us to hear the full story, and don't forget to tell us where you're tuning in from. Subscribe now for more. The wind howled through the streets of New York, sharp and biting, as it swept through the empty alleys, cutting past every corner, every door, as if trying to remind the city of its power. Snowflakes fell in thick layers, a quiet, persistent blanket covering the sidewalks and softening the city's usual roar. The bright lights of nearby storefronts flickered, but the streets felt eerily still, as though the world itself had slowed its pace to match the heavy fall of winter. At the nearly deserted bus stop, beneath the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, Leo Harris hunched his shoulders against the cold. His worn olive jacket did little to protect him from the chill that had soaked into his bones. He clutched a manila folder tightly to his chest. Inside were 5 resumes, each a silent rejection from the jobs he'd hoped for, the future he'd once imagined. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog the air, as he stared down at the snow accumulating at his feet. 44 years old, a former architect with a promising career, now left homeless after the collapse of his family and everything he had worked for. A widow, a father to a son he barely saw, Leo had lost more than just his job. He had lost the purpose that once defined him. The red glow of the nearby pharmacy's sign blinked 8:41 p.m., and still no bus in sight. The cold had soaked through his worn boots, creeping up his legs and into his weary heart. In the distance, the sound of heels clicking sharply against the pavement broke the stillness. Leo glanced up, barely noticing at first, but then he saw her, a woman, probably in her 30s, walking briskly in a business skirt and blouse, no coat, her hair damp with snow and clinging to her face. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, and she stopped beneath the same awning, breath short, hand shaking from the cold. Leo turned his gaze away, trying not to stare, though something about her presence struck him. Clean, polished, yet clearly struggling against the elements. He wasn't the type to get involved, not anymore. He had his own battles to fight. But then the wind howled again, biting harder than before, and the woman flinched, curling inward as though the cold had become too much to bear. Without thinking, Leo shifted his weight, feeling the chill creep further under his skin, but the thought of the woman standing there, alone, struck a chord. His jacket wasn't much, barely enough to keep him warm, but it was something he still had to offer. With a quiet sigh, Leo shrugged off the jacket and stepped toward her. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked up, startled by the gesture. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice thin, barely above a whisper. Leo gave her a tired smile, one that barely masked the exhaustion in his bones. "I've already lost enough today. This coat, it's the only thing I have left to give." She hesitated, glancing down at the jacket and then back at him. She protested softly. Leo shook his head gently. "Not tonight," he said, draping it over her shoulders. The warmth of the coat startled her, a strange comfort in the middle of the cold night. She pulled it tighter around herself, and for a moment they stood in silence, the snow falling steadily around them. The city seemed to vanish into the whiteness, and all that remained was this quiet moment between two strangers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Leo nodded, folding his arms across his chest, trying to keep warm. They stood together, the sound of the snow crunching beneath their feet the only noise between them. Finally, the bus arrived, headlights cutting through the snow. The woman turned toward it but then paused, glancing back at Leo. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked, her voice softer now. Leo shrugged, his breath fogging in the air. "Somewhere," he said, but his answer was far from the truth. The back seat of his truck behind an old warehouse on the edge of the city would be his destination, the only place left to him. She reached into her purse and handed him a card, her fingers trembling slightly. "In case you ever need anything," she said. Leo took the card, slipping it into his folder without a glance. He didn't expect to use it. People said things like that all the time, but most didn't mean it. She turned and stepped onto the bus, disappearing into the night, the warmth of the coat now wrapped around her like a shield. Leo stood there for a long moment, watching the bus pull away, and then he was alone again. The silence of the night settling back in, not from the cold but from something else. Something that had stirred inside him when he saw the woman, a reminder that perhaps he wasn't as lost as he thought. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered to himself, then turned and walked into the night. Marissa Dunn stepped into the warmth of her penthouse apartment, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft click. The contrast between the biting cold outside and the quiet comfort of her home was almost jarring. She set her purse down on the entryway table, her heels clicking softly against the marble floors as she moved through the space. The silence was overwhelming. No music played in the background, no faint sound of a television. The apartment, though luxurious with its high ceilings and sleek, modern furniture, felt empty, hollow even. As she walked across the room, her mind drifted back to the cold night and the man she had encountered at the bus stop. The jacket, now draped over her shoulders, was too big for her. It smelled faintly of soap, clean and comforting, but also of something more. A memory, a warmth she hadn't realized she had missed. As she stood in front of the mirror adjusting it slightly, her eyes fell to the inner pocket of the coat. Curiosity pricked at her and she slipped her fingers inside. Her touch brushed against something small, folded, and slightly crinkled. Pulling it out, she unfolded the paper carefully, revealing a child's drawing. The edges were worn, the corners bent, the paper smudged with fingerprints. Two stick figures stood hand in hand beneath a crooked sun, their proportions uneven but endearing. At the bottom, scrawled in untidy handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy. Noah." A sharp breath caught in Marissa's throat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the drawing in her hands. It was so simple, so innocent, and yet it was a stark reminder of something she had long buried. What it meant to be loved unconditionally, to be seen for who you were, without judgment. The drawing pulled at something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, she was no longer in the sleek, empty confines of her penthouse, but back to the days of her childhood, a time when she had known the warmth of a kind heart and the safety of a simple gesture. She sank onto the edge of her plush sofa, still clutching the drawing in her hands, her chest tight with an unexpected wave of emotion. The tears that she thought had long since dried, hidden beneath her carefully constructed layers of success and power, began to well up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. Not since she was a little girl, cold and hungry, curled up on the steps of a church, praying for someone to notice her. That night, someone had. An old man with kind eyes and a weathered face had wrapped his coat around her shoulders without question, without hesitation. He hadn't said much, just smiled at her, and told her, "You'll be okay." She had never seen that man again, but that small act of kindness, that simple offering, had changed the course of her life. It had reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, that there were people who cared. And yet, in the years that followed, she had buried that memory. Her rise to power in the corporate world had demanded sacrifices, emotional, personal, and she had grown accustomed to the cold, calculating world she inhabited. She had forgotten what it meant to need help, to accept kindness without expecting anything in return. Until tonight, Leo had reminded her of that forgotten part of herself. She hadn't wanted to accept his offer at the bus stop. Pride had almost made her refuse, but there had been something in his eyes, a quiet desperation, but also a genuine, selfless desire to help. She couldn't refuse him, not when his simple act of giving his coat to a stranger spoke volumes about the kind of person he was. And that jacket, with its worn fabric and faint smell of coffee and soap, had somehow made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. A connection, an understanding that went beyond words. She looked down at the drawing again, the little heart between the two stick figures. Noah. The name lingered in her mind like a question, a mystery. She wondered about him, the child whose love was so clearly the center of Leo's world. She wondered about Leo himself, the man who had nothing left but his kindness, yet had still chosen to give. Marissa wiped her cheeks, the tears now streaking down her face. She wasn't the same woman she had been before she met him. The woman who had built an empire, who had buried her past in pursuit of success, was fading. She realized in that moment how much she had sacrificed to get where she was. And for what? Power? Prestige? None of it had ever felt as real as the kindness Leo had shown her. A stranger on a cold winter's night. She gently folded the drawing and placed it on her lap, still holding the jacket close. The warmth of it against her chest was comforting, but it was more than just the physical heat. It felt like a reminder of the past, of kindness, and of the person she had once been, before the world had hardened her. For the first time in a long while, Marissa Dunn didn't feel so alone. Leo sat in the driver's seat of his old Chevy truck, the engine sputtering but still holding strong after all these years. The headlights cut through the snow, casting a dim light on the surrounding empty streets. It was a familiar scene, this quiet isolation, the world outside muffled by the snow, the cold creeping to the truck from every crack. He had parked behind the same old warehouse, where the scent of rust and damp concrete lingered in the air. It was a place that had become both his shelter and his prison, a space that held memories of a time when things were simpler, before everything had unraveled. He glanced at the worn-out blanket draped across the passenger seat, the pillow crumpled in the corner, and the lunchbox tucked beneath the dashboard. His little slice of home. For now, it was all he had. He pulled out the small tin box from the glove compartment, his fingers brushing against the metal. Inside, a faded photograph lay nestled in the lid, a picture of his wife, Lily, smiling brightly, and their son, Noah, laughing in the background with his crooked grin. Leo's heart tightened as he stared at the photo, the memories flooding back. He whispered softly, as if the words could reach them somehow. "Good night, Lily. Good night, Noah." The words tasted bitter on his tongue, a promise he had made to his son, one that seemed impossible to keep. After Lily's death, after losing everything, Leo had done what he could to stay afloat, but it wasn't enough. The cancer had come out of nowhere. By the time they discovered it, it was already too late. Lily had fought, but there was nothing more to do. 9 months. That's how long he had with her after they found out. Leo left his job to take care of her, watching as everything he had worked for slowly slipped through his fingers. Bills piled up, savings drained, and then came the inevitable, selling the house, moving into smaller spaces, until it was just him and Noah in a truck. But even then, Leo tried to shield his son from the harshness of their reality. He turned the back seat into a spaceship, their nightly dinners of canned soup into adventures. He made sure Noah still believed in something, believed in better days. Despite all the hardship, he still tried to keep some semblance of normalcy for Noah, even when his own heart ached with the weight of everything he had lost. He had walked Noah to school every morning, making sure his shirt was tucked in, his hair neatly combed, and his face free from worry. Leo was determined to be the father his son needed, even if it meant hiding his own pain. One day, a shelter worker had asked him, "Why do you still cut your hair?" Leo had smiled. his eyes tired but resolute. "Because my son needs to believe things can get better, and I need to look like I believe that too." But it hadn't been enough. The social worker had come. Noah needed stability, she had said. Leo had signed the papers, his hands shaking as he hugged his son, whispering, "Just for now. I'll come back for you." And since then, every day had felt like a climb. Every job he took, every line he stood in for job fairs or workshops. It was all part of a plan he was building quietly, slowly but surely. Tonight, that plan felt further away than ever as he sat shivering in the truck. The cold was seeping into his bones, and despite the blankets, despite the memories, there was a sense of emptiness that had settled in his chest. His mind drifted back to the woman at the bus stop, Marissa, the kindness she had shown when he offered her his jacket. It was a small act, but it felt bigger than that. For the first time in months, he had done something good, something that made him feel like he hadn't completely lost himself. He wasn't invisible, not to her. Leo reached down and touched the worn fabric of the coat, the smell of soap and something warm still clinging to it. He didn't know why he'd done it. Maybe because she reminded him of Lily, or maybe because he just needed to remind himself that he could still give something, that he wasn't just a man who had nothing left. The snow kept falling, steady and unrelenting, but for a brief moment, Leo didn't feel quite so lost. He thought about the card Marissa had given him, the way she had offered it without expectation. People said things like that all the time, but this felt different. He hadn't expected to use it, hadn't thought for a second that someone like her would ever want to help someone like him. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild, to stop being the man who only took. He pulled the blanket over himself and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling of the truck. Outside, the world seemed to blur in the snowfall. For the first time in a long time, Leo allowed himself to drift into sleep, not completely giving up hope, but letting it rest softly in his heart, like a faint, quiet flicker. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered to himself once more. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a lie. The morning light filtered through the sleek glass windows of Marissa's office, casting long shadows on the polished floors. She sat at her desk, staring out at the skyline of the city, but her thoughts were far from the high-rise buildings or the endless meetings waiting for her. Instead, her mind kept drifting back to Leo, the man she had met the night before. His worn jacket, the kindness in his tired eyes, and the quiet dignity with which he had offered it to her despite his own hardship. She couldn't shake the image of him standing there, shivering, offering her the only warmth he had left in the world. Marissa sighed and leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She thought about the moments when she had felt truly seen, when someone had given her their time, their attention, when they had acted selflessly without asking for anything in return. Those moments were few and far between, buried under years of ambition, success, and the coldness of corporate life. But Leo, his simple, unspoken act of kindness, had awakened something in her, something she hadn't realized she had lost. As a child, Marissa had lived in foster homes, moving from one to the next, always searching for a place to belong. It was in those years of uncertainty and isolation that she had learned to depend on herself, to shut out the vulnerability that came with needing others. She had built her career piece by piece, climbing the ladder with determination and grit. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten the importance of human connection, the power of kindness in a world that often demanded too much and gave too little in return. Now, sitting in her office, she realized just how far removed she had become from the person she once was, the girl who had longed for warmth, for a simple gesture that told her she mattered, the girl who had been taken in by a stranger, an old man who had wrapped his coat around her when she was cold and alone, had never forgotten that moment. It had changed her, even if she hadn't understood its significance at the time. And now, Leo had reminded her of that forgotten part of herself. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and after a moment's hesitation, she opened her laptop and began typing. She started with his name, Leo Harris. And from there, the search was a flurry of clicks. She pulled up public records, scoured job boards, and traced his steps as best as she could. It was a process she was used to, finding the right candidates for her company, tracking down elusive talent. But this wasn't about finding a developer or an executive. It was about finding him, about understanding the man who had given her his only coat without a second thought, without asking for anything in return. Her assistant, Rachel, entered the room, a coffee cup in her hands. "Everything okay, Miss Dunn?" she asked, setting the cup down gently on the desk. Marissa didn't immediately respond, her eyes fixed on the screen. She scrolled through the search results, her mind racing. The more she read, the more she felt a growing need to do something for him. It wasn't just about repaying the gesture, it was about offering him something more. Something real. Leo didn't need a handout. He needed a chance. "I need you to help me find someone," Marissa said, her voice steady but firm. "His name is Leo Harris. He was at the bus stop on 56th and Madison last night, around 8:30. He gave me his jacket." She paused, her heart tightening as she spoke the words out loud. "I want to find him." Rachel blinked in surprise but nodded immediately. "Of course. I'll get started on it right away." Over the next few days, Marissa's team worked tirelessly, tracking down the man who had unknowingly ignited something in her. They pulled traffic camera footage from the nearby intersections, piecing together his movements, tracing the bus routes, and cross-referencing entry logs. Rachel was relentless, bringing Marissa updates on the progress. They narrowed it down to a few possible addresses, each one furthering Marissa's conviction that she had to meet him again, to offer him more than just a thank you card. She needed to do something that would show him that kindness could still exist in a world that so often ignored it. Finally, after days of searching, Rachel returned to Marissa's office with the answer. "We found him. He's staying at a warehouse in the Bronx. His truck is parked behind it, and he's been seen coming and going. We've confirmed it's him." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "I want to go there, now." Rachel hesitated. "Are you sure? We could send someone else to approach him?" "No," Marissa replied, her voice softer but resolute. "This is something I need to do. It's personal." Marissa's assistant nodded, understanding the weight of the request. She arranged for a driver to take Marissa to the Bronx. As they drove through streets unfamiliar to Marissa, streets far removed from the polished glass towers of Infinity Group, she felt a sense of anticipation, a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The world outside the car felt different, colder, more raw. It was a far cry from the world Marissa had built for herself, but it was the world Leo inhabited, and for the first time in a long time, Marissa felt ready to step into it. When they arrived, the sight of Leo's old truck parked behind the warehouse was like a punch to the gut. The snow had piled up around it, and the truck looked as if it hadn't moved in days. She stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin, but she didn't mind. She was there for a reason. She walked slowly toward the truck, the gravel crunching beneath her heels. As she got closer, she saw him, Leo, standing in the front seat, rubbing his eyes as if he had just woken up. He looked at her, confused at first. Then recognition flickered in his expression, followed by a hesitant smile. "Claire?" he asked, his voice hoarse from sleep. Marissa smiled back, a small, uncertain smile, but there was a warmth in it. "Hi, Leo." Leo stood outside the battered truck, his eyes still adjusting to the daylight as Marissa approached. Her figure grew clearer with each step, and for a moment he felt the weight of the world press heavier on his shoulders. His clothes were wrinkled, his boots caked in snow, and the smell of sweat lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of the rusted vehicle. He wanted to hide, to shrink back into the comfort of his truck, where the world couldn't judge him. But Marissa wasn't a stranger anymore, and there was something about the way she had looked at him, something soft and genuine, that made him hesitate. It was as if she wasn't here to pity him, but to see him, to really see him, for the first time in years. When she stopped a few feet away, Leo opened his mouth, but no words came. The space between them felt thick, heavy, and he wasn't sure what to say. He'd expected her to be different, more formal, more distant, but she wasn't. Her eyes, though cautious, were kind. She wasn't looking at him like some lost cause. She wasn't judging him. Instead, she simply waited for him to speak, giving him space to come to terms with the moment. I didn't expect to see you again, Leo muttered, the words rough with the sleep still clouding his mind. He couldn't help but feel embarrassed, his face burning slightly as he stood there in front of her. He wasn't exactly the image of success. The man who had given her his jacket wasn't someone who belonged in her world, in her circles. What could she possibly want with someone like him? Marissa gave a small, almost hesitant smile. I know, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of an unspoken understanding. She studied him for a moment, her gaze lingering on the truck, on his disheveled appearance. And for the first time, Leo felt something stir inside him, a mix of discomfort and something warmer, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. It wasn't pity, it wasn't judgment, it was something closer to compassion, maybe even hope. I didn't come here to thank you for the coat, she continued, stepping closer, her breath visible in the air between them. I came because I wanted to see the man who gave it to me. The man who offered the only thing he had left to a stranger. She paused for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you're someone who understands the value of kindness in a way I've forgotten. Leo swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. He had no idea what to say. The last time someone had looked at him with such softness was a lifetime ago, before everything had changed, before Lily had gotten sick, before he had lost his job, before his life had come to this. The cold, forgotten edges of a city, the cold, forgotten edges of a city that no longer seemed to care about him or anyone like him. Marissa stepped even closer, and Leo couldn't look away. There was something in her eyes, something that made him want to believe in himself again, even if just for a moment. What are you doing here, really? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a mix of disbelief and a guarded hope. Why would someone like you want to help me? Her smile softened, and she met his gaze with an intensity that felt like it was peeling back the layers of his defense, one by one. Because I think we've both been lost in our own ways, and maybe we can help each other find our way back. Leo blinked, the words striking deep. He didn't know if he could trust her offer. He didn't even know if he was ready to trust anything that felt too good to be true. After all, life had taught him to distrust anything that seemed too perfect, too easy. But then, he remembered the cold, and the way her hands had trembled as she accepted the coat from him. He remembered how she hadn't recoiled in shame, how she hadn't rejected him despite all his flaws. And suddenly, he wasn't so sure about his fears anymore. Marissa continued, her voice firm yet gentle. I want to offer you more than just a place to stay, Leo. I'm not here to save you, but I want to help you find something. Maybe a chance to start over. I've created a role in my company for someone like you, someone who understands what it means to be invisible, to struggle. I need someone who understands what it means to be invisible, to struggle. I need to bring empathy and heart into a world that's too often driven by numbers and profit. You have something to offer, Leo. Something no resume can capture. Leo's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was she serious? Was this a dream, a cruel joke, or was it something real? His mind raced with doubt, but there was a flicker of something inside him. Something small, but powerful. Something he hadn't felt in years. You think I'm qualified? His voice cracked slightly, the disbelief evident in his tone. I think you're exactly what my company needs, Marissa replied, her smile unwavering. You have a story, Leo. You've lived it. And I believe you can teach people something that no degree or position ever could. Leo stood there for a long moment, unable to form a response. The offer felt like it had come out of nowhere, but deep down, he knew he couldn't just walk away from it. He knew he couldn't just walk away from it. He had been given a chance, a real chance. And, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite as invisible as he once did. Okay, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I'll give it a shot. Leo wasn't sure what to expect when he walked into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Infinity Group, but it certainly wasn't this. The polished marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the bright, sterile atmosphere of a place that felt like it belonged to another world, one he had long since stopped believing he could be a part of. He stood there for a moment, trying to take in the space, his hands clammy and his stomach in knots. The scent of fresh coffee and expensive perfume mixed in the air, creating an overwhelming feeling of disconnect. He was a man who had spent more nights sleeping in the front seat of a rusted Chevy than he had in a real bed. What was he doing here? Leo. The sound of his name brought him back to reality, and he turned to see Marissa standing at the entrance of the elevator bay. She was dressed sharply, the business attire that he had only ever seen on television or in magazine spreads. She smiled at him warmly, her presence a striking contrast to the cold, imposing space around them. Marissa, Leo replied, forcing a smile despite the whirlwind of nerves inside him. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, his jacket a bit too big, sleeves rolled up awkwardly. He still couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. Didn't belong in a place like this, where the world was shiny and flawless, far removed from the back alleys and lonely streets he had wandered for so long. Come on, let's go upstairs, Marissa said, motioning for him to follow. As they walked toward the elevators, Leo's shoes made a soft echo against the polished floors. The door to the elevator slid open, and they stepped inside. Leo glanced at the gleaming buttons, feeling out of place in a world that was so well organized, so perfectly designed. The elevator hummed softly as it ascended, and Leo could feel the weight of every floor they passed. He wanted to say something, to ask what he was doing here, but the words wouldn't come. Marissa had made it clear when they first met that she wasn't offering him a charity case. But still, the offer she had extended seemed too surreal. Could a man who had spent the past few years living in the back seat of his truck, dealing with rejection after rejection, really find a place in a company like this? The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and they stepped into a spacious office area that seemed to pulse with energy. The walls were lined with modern art, and the open layout made the space feel both comfortable and intimidating. A few employees glanced up as they passed by, offering polite nods and quick smiles. But there was no mistaking the fact that Leo was a foreign element in this world, an intruder in a place where appearances mattered, and success was measured by the dollar. This is where the magic happens, Marissa said with a smile, her voice light but sincere. She led him down a corridor to a small conference room with a sleek glass table and ergonomic chairs. The windows looked out onto the skyline, offering a view of the city that made Leo feel even more out of place. As he sat down, his nerves threatened to swallow him whole. He had no idea what he was doing here, no idea how he was supposed to contribute to a world that was so far removed from everything he knew. Marissa sat across from him, her eyes focused and kind. Leo, I want you to understand something. She folded her hands on the table, her tone steady and sincere. "I didn't bring you here to give you a job because I feel sorry for you. I brought you here because I believe in you. You have something that none of us here have: experience. A kind of experience. A kind of experience that money can't buy. The kind that teaches you what it means to truly understand people, to listen to them, and to help them when they need it most." Leo shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking down at his hands, his thoughts racing. "I don't belong here," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You belong more than you think," Marissa replied, her eyes unwavering. "You've lived through things that many of us will never have to experience. That's a strength. And it's something that this company needs." Leo swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. It felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or turn back. His doubts flared up again, the familiar voices in his head telling him he wasn't good enough, that this was all too good to be true. But then, he remembered the way Marissa had looked at him when she handed him that card at the bus stop, like she saw something in him that he had long forgotten. "I don't have a degree," Leo said, his voice tight with hesitation. "I don't know anything about business or tech. I've never been in a place like this before." "You don't need to know any of that," Marissa said, her smile widening. "You know people. You know what it's like to struggle, to be overlooked. That's exactly what this company needs. A voice that reminds us why we do what we do. We need someone who isn't afraid to speak up, to make sure that kindness and empathy are at the heart of everything we do here." Leo felt a flicker of hope stir inside him. It wasn't the kind of hope that shouted from the rooftops, but a quiet, steady pulse that told him he wasn't alone in this fight. He wasn't invisible anymore. He looked up at Marissa, her eyes full of expectation and faith, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was walking in the shadows. He was ready to take a step forward. "I'll do it," he said, his voice stronger now, a little less uncertain. "I'll do my best." The days following his first meeting at Infinity Group passed in a blur, and Leo found himself trying to adjust to a world that still felt foreign, no matter how much he tried to belong. The first morning he arrived at the office, he was greeted by the bright, sterile light of the open floor plan, the hum of busy workers, and the sleek, polished desks that seemed to reflect the ambition of everyone who sat behind them. It was nothing like the construction sites or empty rooms he had known. This place was fast, focused, and unfamiliar. He had never been someone who was at ease in a world where appearances mattered as much as results, but Marissa's words echoed in his mind. "You belong more than you think." Still, the doubts lingered, like shadows clinging to the corners of his mind. Who was he to sit in a conference room with high-level executives, to be asked his opinion about the direction of the company? He didn't have a degree, wasn't versed in the latest trends or technologies, and every day he fought the urge to slip back into the shadows, to disappear and leave the real work to those who were more qualified. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about something deeper. Marissa had given him a chance, and the quiet, steady flicker of hope that he had buried for so long began to feel real. The first few weeks were harder than he had anticipated. At first, he felt like an outsider, a man playing a part he wasn't sure he could pull off. His clothes still seemed out of place in the polished environment, and every time he opened his mouth to speak, he hesitated, unsure if he was saying the right thing. It wasn't that anyone made him feel unwelcome. Quite the opposite. Marissa's team was kind, patient even, as they eased him into the rhythm of the company. But Leo couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite fit, that he wasn't up to the task. But then, something started to change. It began with small moments. Conversations by the coffee machine, chats in the hallway, the sound of someone calling his name when they needed advice. Leo's role wasn't in finance or strategy. It wasn't about numbers, data, or graphs. His job was to remind people why they did what they did. He was the human element in a company driven by technology, and at first it felt like a luxury. Who needed empathy in the world of business? He had asked himself that question more than once, but as the days wore on, he saw things that others didn't. He saw the young developer hunched over his computer, working late into the night, not because he was passionate, but because he was afraid of failing. He saw the tired faces of senior managers, their minds always on the next quarter's targets, never on the people who made it all possible. One afternoon, during a break in a long meeting, Leo sat with a junior employee, a woman named Jenna who had been struggling with burnout. She was bright, full of potential, but it was clear the pressure of the job was starting to weigh on her. As they talked, she told him how she felt invisible in the company, like she was just another cog in the machine. Her voice never heard, her struggles dismissed. Leo listened carefully, nodding as he did, remembering how it felt to be that invisible person, to be passed over despite your efforts, to feel like no one saw you. "I've been there," Leo said quietly, his voice low but steady. "It's not easy, but it doesn't mean you're alone. And it doesn't mean your worth is tied to how much work you can do or how fast you can get it done." The way Jenna looked at him after that moment was enough to tell him he had said something important. She smiled, a little hesitantly at first, but it was real. The weight seemed to lift off her shoulders, even if just a little. And in that moment, Leo realized something that he hadn't fully understood before. His job wasn't about having all the answers, about fixing the company's problems. It was about creating space for people to breathe, to be heard, and to be seen. The more Leo spoke to people, the more he found himself becoming that quiet source of comfort, the person who didn't just see the productivity or the success, but the struggles beneath it. He didn't offer solutions, didn't give advice unless it was asked for, but he listened. And in that, people found something they hadn't realized they were missing. The company's atmosphere began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic transformation overnight, but it was there, small and steady. Employees started sharing more in meetings, offering suggestions they had been too afraid to voice before. The pressure to perform didn't vanish, but there was a sense of understanding, a feeling that the company cared not just about their output, but about their well-being. Marissa watched it all unfold with quiet pride. She had known that Leo's voice was something the company needed, even if it wasn't the kind of leadership that came with a title or a corner office. His impact was subtle but profound. He reminded everyone that there was more to success than just the numbers, that a company was only as strong as the people who made it up. And for Leo, the man who had once slept in the back seat of a truck and wondered if he would ever matter again, the feeling was almost surreal. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was contributing. He was building something that didn't rely on what he had lost, but on what he could give. In the silence of his small office, a place that had slowly started to feel like his own, Leo looked out the window at the city skyline. The world outside was bustling, moving too fast for him to keep up with. But for the first time in years, Leo didn't feel like he was invisible anymore. He belonged. And maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to believe that he was enough. As the weeks passed, Leo found himself adjusting more and more to his new role at Infinity Group. He had learned to navigate the sleek, fast-paced world of the office, and though it was still a world that felt like it didn't quite belong to him, he had started to carve out a space of his own. Marissa's belief in him had become a quiet anchor in his life. And slowly, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he could belong here too. It wasn't the power, the prestige, or even the salary that mattered. It was the small, everyday moments of connection he now found in the most unexpected places. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, Leo found himself walking through the building's atrium when a familiar voice called out to him. It was Jenna, the young developer he had spoken to about burnout a few weeks ago. She was standing by a coffee station, her hands wrapped around a cup as she looked up at him, her expression hesitant but hopeful. "Leo, can I talk to you for a second?" Jenna asked, her voice soft. He smiled warmly, gesturing for her to join him. Of course. What's on your mind? They found a small corner of the lounge, away from the buzz of the office. Jenna sat down across from him, taking a deep breath before she spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, she started. About feeling like you're invisible, I realized. I've been kind of drowning here, trying to keep up with expectations, trying to prove myself. And I guess I didn't even know how much I needed someone to just listen, to remind me that it's okay not to be perfect. Leo's heart softened as he listened. He remembered those early days when he had felt exactly the same way, like he was invisible. Like he was invisible, like nothing he did was ever enough. But now, sitting across from Jenna, he understood just how much power there was in truly being seen. He had been offering that to others without realizing it. The gift of presence, the quiet support that allowed people to feel heard, even in the midst of their struggles. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Jenna, Leo said gently. Not here and not anywhere. You got a lot of potential, but it's okay to take things slow, to ask for help when you need it. You're not alone, not here. Jenna's eyes filled with gratitude, and she nodded.
I don't know how to thank you.
You don't have to, Leo replied with a small smile. We're all in this together. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just show up for someone else when they need it. That was the moment when Leo realized how much he had grown, not just in his role at Infinity Group, but as a person. He had spent so many years believing that he was unimportant, that his worth was tied to what he could accomplish, to the titles he once held. But now he understood that the real power came from the connections he built, the kindness he offered, and the way he helped others feel like they mattered. The changes were subtle at first, but as Leo continued to speak with more employees, offering advice, listening to their struggles, and encouraging them to embrace vulnerability, he saw the atmosphere of the company shift. It was like a ripple effect. People started to open up more in meetings, sharing ideas and concerns they had previously kept to themselves. The energy in the office became lighter, not because the work got easier, but because employees felt supported, seen, and heard. Marissa noticed it too. She had always prided herself on building a successful business, but she realized that the true success of Infinity Group didn't just come from the bottom line. It came from the people who worked there, from the culture that was nurtured within the walls. And Leo was a huge part of that transformation. He was the heartbeat of the company, reminding everyone that success wasn't just about hitting numbers. It was about creating a space where people could thrive, both professionally and personally. One afternoon, as they stood together in the lobby, watching the hustle of the office slow down for the day, Marissa turned to Leo. You've changed this place, Leo, in ways I don't think even you realize. Leo glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'm just trying to do what I can, he said, his voice modest but sincere. Marissa shook her head, her eyes filled with admiration. No, you've done more than that. You've reminded us all that there's more to work than just results. There's heart, there's purpose. You've brought that back to all of us. As Leo walked away from their conversation, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He was thriving, not because of the title he held or the salary he earned, but because he had found a place where his humanity, his kindness, and his experiences were valued. He had found a space where he didn't need to prove himself. He was enough, just as he was. And that was more than he had ever hoped for. Leo had been working at Infinity Group for nearly 6 months now, and while the job still felt like a delicate balancing act, he had begun to find a rhythm. The initial shock of being thrust into such a high-paced professional world had worn off, and he was starting to feel a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. But even as he adjusted to his new environment, there was a lingering sense of something unfinished, something he hadn't fully addressed in the quiet, reflective corners of his mind. Despite the connections he'd made, despite the role he had carved out for himself, he was still missing something. It was a Friday afternoon when Marissa called him into her office. Leo had become used to her directness. She didn't mince words, and she didn't offer praise unless it was earned. But there was something different in her voice that day, something that felt more personal, more urgent. He felt a knot form in his stomach as he walked toward her office. "Come in, Leo," Marissa said as she waved him inside, her expression neutral, but with a hint of something deeper behind her eyes. As he entered, Leo noticed the large window behind her desk, the skyline of the city stretching beyond. For a moment, he felt out of place in the sleek glass and steel world she had built. "Take a seat," she said, motioning to the chair in front of her desk. Leo sat down, feeling his hands instinctively fold together. He didn't know why, but his heart was racing. It wasn't the first time he'd been in her office, but today felt different. Marissa sat back, her fingers lightly tapping the surface of the desk. "I've been thinking about the way things have been going lately," she began, her eyes scanning his face. "The culture in the company, the way people are interacting, the way we're handling challenges. It's all starting to shift." Leo nodded, unsure of where she was going with this. "I've noticed that too. People seem more engaged, more open." "Exactly," she said, leaning forward slightly. "And I want to tell you that I'm incredibly grateful for your role in that change. But I think there's something even bigger at play here, something I've been holding off on addressing because I wasn't sure you'd be ready. But I think it's time." Leo felt a pang of nervousness shoot through him. He had no idea where this conversation was headed. Leo, Marissa said, her voice softening. "I want to offer you a permanent leadership role here. Not just as a cultural advisor, but as someone who will help lead the company's broader strategy, shifting the focus from profit to people. You've shown me that it's not just about business metrics. It's about business metrics. It's about the heart of this company, about creating an environment where employees are seen and heard. You're the key to that." Leo's mind went blank. A permanent leadership role. Him. He had spent so many years feeling invisible, like he didn't belong in a world that valued success over humanity. But here was Marissa offering him a seat at the table, a chance to shape the future of a company that had given him more than just a job. It had given him a sense of purpose, a place where he felt valued for who he was, not what he could do. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He started, but the words caught in his throat. "I don't know what to say." Marissa smiled, a quiet, understanding smile. "You don't need to say anything yet, Leo. Just think about it. I want you to be a part of this company, not just as an employee, but as a partner in creating something meaningful. You've proven you can do it, and I think you're exactly what this company needs to keep moving forward." The room was silent for a moment as Leo absorbed her words. He had spent so many years doubting himself, so many nights lying awake, wondering if he was ever going to be good enough. But here, in this moment, with Marissa's words echoing in his ears, he realized something profound. He was enough. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be himself. And in a world that often overlooked the quiet strength of people like him, that was more than enough. "I'll think about it," Leo said finally, his voice steady. "But I'm honored, Marissa. Thank you." Marissa nodded, her eyes filled with sincerity. Take your time. Just know that we're ready when you are. As Leo left her office, the weight of the decision ahead of him hung heavy in the air. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from promises or aspirations. It was a quiet, steady belief that he had a place here, that his voice mattered. No matter what happened next, Leo knew one thing. He had already found his true value. A few months passed since that pivotal meeting in Marissa's office. Leo had settled more comfortably into his new role, but the offer she had made still lingered in his mind. The idea of being part of the company's leadership, shaping its future, had seemed almost unreal at first. But now, as he walked through the familiar hallways of Infinity Group, he realized just how much he had transformed. Not just professionally, but personally. The company's atmosphere had changed too, thanks to the quiet yet profound shift Leo had helped create. There was more laughter in the break rooms, more conversations in the hallways, and an unspoken sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Employees felt seen, heard, and valued, not just for their productivity but for who they were as people. It wasn't the result of some grand corporate initiative or lofty speech. It was the small acts of kindness, the quiet listening, the encouragement that Leo had fostered in every corner of the company. Marissa had been right. There was more to business than profits and deadlines. People needed to feel connected to their work, to the company they were building. And Leo had shown them how to reconnect with that core belief. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of the work seemed too heavy, when the old doubts crept in, whispering that he wasn't enough. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Leo had found his place not just as an employee, but as someone who could make a real difference. It was on a quiet Thursday morning, a day that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, that Marissa called Leo into her office again. The nerves that had once gripped him during their first meeting here were gone. In their place was a calm certainty. He had come a long way, from the man who had slept in his truck, clutching onto a hope that seemed so distant, to someone who was part of something larger than himself, something that mattered. Marissa was sitting at her desk, her eyes focused on the paperwork in front of her. But when Leo stepped inside, she looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Leo," she said, her voice warm, but there was an undeniable weight to her tone. "I need to talk to you about something important." Leo sat down across from her, his hands resting on his knees. He could sense the seriousness in her voice, the way she was gathering her thoughts. "What's on your mind?" he asked. His curiosity piqued. Marissa set down the papers and leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about what we've accomplished here. You've done more than just help shift the culture. You've become the heartbeat of this company, reminding us all what it means to care about the people who make it all possible. But there's something else we need from you. Something bigger." Leo's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Marissa took a deep breath, her gaze steady and confident. "I'm offering you something more than just a leadership position. I want you to be the company's first Chief Culture Officer. This is more than just a title. It's a recognition of the work you've already done here and a commitment to the future of Infinity Group. You will be responsible for maintaining our company's values, ensuring that we remain a place where people come first. You'll be the voice for the employees, the one who reminds us that business isn't just about the bottom line." Leo stared at her, his mind racing. Chief Culture Officer. It sounded so official, so monumental, but all he could focus on was the fact that Marissa was giving him the opportunity to take this mission. His mission, further than he ever imagined. The weight of it felt both overwhelming and exhilarating. He had spent so long feeling like an outsider, unsure of where he fit into the world. And now, Marissa was offering him a chance to lead the way, to make sure that no one else would ever feel the way he had. "I don't know what to say," Leo replied, his voice thick with emotion. I never expected any of this. I never thought I'd be in a position to do something like this." "You've already done it," Marissa said softly, her eyes shining with conviction. "You've shown us what true leadership looks like. It's not about authority or titles. It's about connecting with people. It's about making them feel like they matter. And that's why I'm offering you this role. Because you've proven that you have something more valuable than any degree or resume. You have heart. And that's what we need to continue building here." Leo felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He thought about the years he had spent doubting himself, about the cold nights when he thought he had nothing left to give. He had come so far from that man. And now, here he was, being asked to shape the future of a company that had given him more than just a job. It had given him a purpose. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. I'll take the role." Marissa smiled, and for the first time, Leo realized just how much he had changed. He wasn't just the man who gave away his coat on a cold night anymore. He was someone who had found a place where he truly belonged, where his voice mattered. And as he left Marissa's office that day, his heart was lighter than it had been in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Leo wasn't afraid. He knew that no matter what came next, he had already found his place in the world. And that was enough. The morning of the company-wide meeting arrived, and as Leo walked through the familiar corridors of Infinity Group, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. The buzz of the office was palpable. Employees moved quickly between meetings, laughter echoed from the break room, and the hum of keyboards filled the air. But Leo's heart was focused on one thing. Today would mark a new chapter in his journey, not just with the company, but with himself. He had spent months adjusting to his role, his confidence growing with each day. He was no longer the man who had wandered the streets, lost in a haze of doubt and fear. The small, quiet acts of kindness he had infused into the company's culture had blossomed into something bigger. He was no longer just a cultural advisor. He had become the voice that reminded people of their value beyond productivity. Today, however, he was being asked to do something bigger, to speak in front of the entire company, to share his journey, to inspire them the way he had inspired a few, and to remind everyone of the power of kindness. As Leo approached the conference room, he paused just outside the door, taking a deep breath. His palms were slightly sweaty, his mind racing with the weight of what was about to happen. He was going to stand before hundreds of employees and tell them his story, a story of loss, resilience, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. He had never been one for public speaking, had always preferred to stay in the background, far from the spotlight. But today, he wasn't just telling his story for himself, he was telling it for every person who had ever felt unseen, unheard, and unimportant. When the door swung open, Leo stepped inside. The room fell quiet as he made his way to the front. The rows of seats were filled with faces, some familiar, some he had only seen in passing. Marissa was seated near the front, her gaze warm and steady as she watched him. Leo took his place at the podium, his heart beating loudly in his chest. The lights were bright above him, but the faces below were what drew his focus. These were the people who had become part of his new world. They had trusted him, followed his lead, and now it was his turn to show them what true leadership really meant. "Good morning," Leo began, his voice surprisingly steady. The room seemed to lean in, hanging on his every word. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I never imagined I'd be standing here in front of all of you, sharing my story. To be honest, I never imagined I'd even be here at all. A few years ago, I didn't have a job, a home, or even the courage to believe that anything could change. But here I am." He paused, allowing the silence to settle, feeling the weight of his words. He wasn't just speaking to the room. He was speaking to his past self, to the man who had once believed he was invisible. "I've spent a lot of my life feeling like I didn't matter," he continued, his voice growing stronger. Like I was just another face in the crowd, another person lost in a city of millions. But the truth is, we all matter. Every single one of us. And what I've learned over the past few months is that success isn't measured by the job title you hold or the salary you earn. It's measured by the impact you have on others. The way you make people feel when they're around you. The way you listen. The way you show up. Even when things are tough. As Leo spoke, he noticed the faces in the crowd softening, the tension lifting from their shoulders. He could see people nodding along as if they were beginning to understand what he was saying. This was no longer just a corporate speech. This was a conversation. A shared understanding of the challenges they all faced, and the hope that they could do better together. "There's a quote I came across once," Leo said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. It goes, "Sometimes the smallest gesture can change someone's life. A coat, a smile, a kind word. These things matter. I know, because I was the one standing at that bus stop, cold and alone, with nothing to offer but the jacket I was wearing. And yet that small act changed the course of my life. And I hope it can remind all of you, too, that you don't need a title or a degree to lead. You just need to be willing to care." The room was silent now, each person deep in their own thoughts. For a moment, Leo felt like he was no longer just speaking to an audience, but sharing a moment of collective truth. We're all here because we've been given a chance to make something meaningful, something that goes beyond numbers and metrics. I'm proud to be part of this company, and I'm proud to work alongside each of you. Together, we can create something bigger than any of us could alone. Leo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. As he looked out at the sea of faces, he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. He had found his place here, not just in the company, but in the world. And as the applause began to ripple through the room, he knew that this wasn't just the beginning of his journey at Infinity Group. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where he would continue to give, to lead, and to remind others that kindness was the truest form of leadership. As the room erupted into applause, Leo felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done it. He had done it. He had shared his story, and in doing so, had reminded everyone in that room of something essential: the power of human connection. And for the first time, he truly believed that he belonged. A month had passed since Leo's heartfelt speech to the company. The ripples of that moment were still being felt in every corner of Infinity Group, and he could see the change. People had started speaking more openly, sharing their thoughts, their challenges, their hopes for the future. They were no longer just employees fulfilling a job. They were people, individuals with stories and struggles of their own. Leo's role had evolved even further, and he had embraced it with an open heart. But it wasn't just about the culture at Infinity Group anymore. His personal life, too, was beginning to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The phone call came one quiet afternoon, just as Leo was finishing up a meeting with a team member. He had stepped out of the conference room when his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an unfamiliar number, but something about it made him pause. He hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Hello?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. "Leo, it's Marissa," came the voice on the other end. "I need to talk to you about something. Can you meet me downstairs?" A chill ran down his spine. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. "Of course," Leo said, trying to keep his composure. "I'll be right there." As he made his way down to the lobby, his mind raced. He had worked closely with Marissa over the past few months, and though they had forged a strong professional relationship, Leo couldn't help but wonder if something else was going on. The closer he got to the elevators, the more his thoughts spiraled. What could it be? Was this about work? Or something personal? He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing. Marissa's tone had been different. It was like she was preparing him for something big. When he arrived in the lobby, He spotted Marissa right away, standing near the entrance, looking out at the city. She turned as soon as she saw him, her expression unreadable. She smiled, but there was a hint of something deeper behind it, a mixture of pride and something else he couldn't quite place. "Leo, Leo," she began, her voice calm, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done for this company, about how much you've changed the culture here. And it's not just about what you've brought to Infinity Group. It's about the way you've impacted everyone around you. People are more open, more compassionate. You've created something real here." Leo felt a wave of emotion wash over him, but he kept his composure. "I've just been doing my part, Marissa, helping however I can." Marissa shook her head, her smile growing a little wider. "No, Leo. You've done more than just your part. You've become the heart of this company. And I want to acknowledge that. I want you to know just how much you mean to this place." His heart began to race again, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was hearing her correctly.
Are you lying?
Marissa stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm offering you something important. I want you to take this company to the next level. I've been in meetings with the board, and we all agree. You're the one to help us expand, not just in terms of profit, but in terms of purpose. We need someone who understands what it means to lead with heart, someone who can make sure we stay true to the values we've started to build here. I'm offering you a leadership role, Leo, something bigger than you've ever imagined." Leo felt the weight of her words settle on him, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. A leadership role. He had come so far since the days of uncertainty, when he had wondered if he would ever be enough. And now here he was, being asked to lead, to shape the future of a company that had given him so much. I don't know what to say," Leo stammered, still processing the enormity of the offer. "This is a lot." Marissa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to decide right away. Just think about it. You've already proven yourself, Leo. You've shown us what real leadership looks like. And now I want you to help us keep growing. Keep caring. You don't have to do this alone. But I believe you're the one who can make sure we stay on the right path." Leo stood there, his mind spinning. He had spent years running from his past, from the feeling that he was always just one mistake away from being forgotten. But now, in this moment, he felt like he had truly found his place, not just in the company, but in the world. "I'll think about it," he said finally, his voice steady, but his heart full of something new, something he hadn't realized was possible. Hope. He wasn't just the man who had given away a coat anymore. He was someone who had earned the chance to lead, to create, and to make a difference in ways he had once only dreamed of. Marissa smiled, the weight of her offer hanging in the air between them. But it wasn't heavy, it was hopeful. "Take your time, Leo. But just know that when you're ready, we'll be here, waiting for you to take that next step." As Leo left the building that afternoon, the city sprawled out before him, its lights twinkling in the distance. He had come so far, farther than he ever thought possible. And now, for the first time in his life, he felt ready to take the next step, ready to embrace the future, to shape it with his own hands, and to lead with the same heart that had brought him this far. Leo's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most profound transformations. It's easy to forget how much of an impact we can have on others, especially in a world that often seems driven by success and material gain. But as Leo's story shows, true strength lies not in titles or accolades, but in how we show up for others, how we make them feel seen, valued, and heard. From the moment Leo offered his jacket to Marissa, he unknowingly began a chain reaction that would not only change his life, but also the culture of an entire company. His story teaches us that kindness and empathy are not weaknesses. They are strengths that can shape not only our personal lives, but also the world around us. Leo's transformation from a man who felt invisible to someone whose influence created lasting change is a testament to the power of resilience and human connection. The real lesson here is that we all have the power to change lives, whether through a simple gesture, a listening ear, or the willingness to show up for someone in need. No matter where we are in life, we can all take a step toward leading with compassion and purpose. So, where are you in your journey? Are you ready to make a difference no matter how small it may seem? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and encourage. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Let us know in the comments below.